The Green Mile. Some films don't just tell a story, they put you in situations where every emotion feels real and every decision feels uncomfortable. You don't just watch them, you sit with them. And even after they end, they stay in your mind. The Green Mile is one of those films. Released in 1999 and directed by Frank Darabont, it stars Tom Hanks and Michael Clarke Duncan, and at first glance, it may seem like a simple prison drama. But the deeper you go, the more layered and emotional it becomes. It is not built on fast pacing or constant action. It builds slowly, and that slow build is exactly what makes it powerful. This is the kind of film where characters are not simply good or bad. They are shaped by their choices, their fears, and the situations they are placed in. And as the story moves forward, you start to question not just them, but your own perspective as well. Some people see this film as bold. Some find it disturbing. Others connect with it on a much deeper level. And that is what makes it interesting, because it does not try to give you easy answers. It leaves space for interpretation. In this video, we are not just going to go through what happens in the story of The Green Mile. We are going to break down how it happens, why it happens, and what it actually means. Because the real impact of this film is not in the events themselves, but in the meaning behind those events. We will look at the characters closely. Paul Edgecombe, played by Tom Hanks, and John Coffey, played by Michael Clarke Duncan. The way they think, the way they react, and the way their decisions slowly change everything around them. You will see how relationships in this story are not built on simple emotions, but on pressure, responsibility, and moral conflict. We will also talk about the filmmaking side. The direction by Frank Darabont, the performances, the way scenes are shot inside the prison, and how small creative choices shape the overall experience. Because in a film like this, nothing is accidental. Every detail is placed with purpose. As we move forward, you will start to notice layers that are easy to miss on a first watch. The way silence is used, the way certain moments are stretched, the way tension builds without obvious signals. All of this plays a role in how the story affects you. This is not just about watching The Green Mile again. It is about understanding it from a different angle, seeing what is happening beneath the surface, and recognizing the choices that define the entire experience. So if you are someone who enjoys deep and meaningful movie breakdowns, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's get into the story. There are stories that entertain you for a few hours, and then there are stories that sit quietly in your mind long after the screen fades to black. This one does something different. It moves slowly, almost gently, and then without warning, it hits you with something heavy that you were not ready to carry. The Green Mile is not built on action or spectacle. It builds on silence, on small human moments, and on a question that never fully leaves you. What does justice really look like when the world feels unfair from the start? Released in 1999 and directed by Frank Darabont, this film brings together a cast that feels grounded and real from the very first scene. Tom Hanks leads the story as Paul Edgecombe, a man who works inside a prison system where life and death decisions are routine. Alongside him, you have performances that do not try to stand out but instead feel natural, especially Michael Clarke Duncan, whose presence alone changes the tone of every scene he enters. This is not a fast film. It takes its time, and that pacing is part of its strength. Before going any further, it is important to make one thing clear. This is a review and a breakdown, not a replacement for the full experience. The film offers layers that go beyond plot, and those layers are best felt when you watch it yourself. What we are doing here is walking through the story, pausing at the moments that matter, and exploring what makes them work on a deeper level. The story begins in a quiet, almost reflective space. An elderly man sits in a nursing home, watching a black and white film with an expression that suggests he is somewhere else entirely. His name is Paul Edgecombe, and time has clearly moved far ahead of whatever memories he is holding onto. The room around him feels ordinary, but his reaction to the film is not. There is a kind of weight in his eyes, something unresolved, something that refuses to fade even after decades. That opening sets the tone without explaining too much. It gives you a sense that what you are about to hear is not just a story, but a memory that still feels alive. When Paul begins to speak, the transition into the past feels smooth and natural, like stepping into a place that has been waiting for you. The setting shifts to 1935, during the Great Depression, inside a prison block known as Cold Mountain Penitentiary. This is where the Real story begins, and it does not rush to introduce itself. The camera settles into the environment slowly, giving you time to understand the space. The cell block is called E block, but everyone refers to it as the Green Mile because of the color of the floor that leads to the execution room. That detail alone carries a quiet sense of dread. Every step taken on that floor leads to a final destination, and everyone working there knows it. Paul Edgecombe is introduced not as a hero, but as a man doing his job with a level of calm professionalism. He is not hardened in the way you might expect. Instead, he carries a sense of responsibility that feels personal. He understands that the men in his care are not just inmates. They are still human, even if their actions have brought them to this place. That perspective shapes how he interacts with them, and it sets him apart from others around him. The team working alongside Paul includes Brutal Howell, a large and steady presence who mirrors Paul's sense of fairness. There is also Harry Terwilliger and Dean Stanton, both experienced in their roles and aware of the emotional toll this job takes. The dynamic between them feels natural, like a group of men who have spent years together in a difficult environment and learned how to cope in their own ways. They joke when they can, but there is always an understanding of the reality they are dealing with. Then there is Percy Wetmore, and his presence shifts the tone immediately. He is younger, arrogant, and clearly out of place in terms of attitude. Percy does not see the inmates as people. He sees them as opportunities to assert control. His behavior is not just unprofessional, it is unsettling. The others tolerate him, not because they respect him, but because he has connections that protect him from consequences. That tension builds quietly in the background, adding another layer to the environment. The first inmate we spend time with is Edouard Delacroix, a small man with a nervous energy that makes him seem fragile. He is not physically intimidating, and that contrast makes his situation even more uncomfortable to watch. Del does not deny what he has done, but there is a sense that he is more broken than dangerous. Over time, his personality begins to show in small ways, especially through his attachment to a tiny mouse that appears in the cell block. That mouse, later named Mr. Jingles, becomes an unexpected source of light in a place that feels heavy. Del trains him to perform simple tricks, and for a brief moment, the atmosphere shifts. The guards, even the more serious ones, find themselves watching with quiet amusement. It is a small detail, but it matters. It reminds you that even in a place designed for punishment, moments of connection still exist. Paul's approach to Del is calm and respectful. He does not speak down to him or treat him as less than human. Instead, he maintains a level of dignity that feels rare in that setting. That choice is not just about kindness. It reflects Paul's internal code, a belief that even those who have done wrong deserve to be treated with basic decency. That belief will be tested as the story moves forward, but at this stage, it remains steady. As the routine of the block continues, the film takes time to show the process behind executions. It does not rush through it or present it as spectacle. Instead, it focuses on the preparation, the procedures, and the emotional weight carried by those involved. The electric chair, referred to as Old Sparky, is not introduced with dramatic flair. It is simply there, waiting, a constant reminder of what this place is built for. One of the most striking elements in these early moments is how normal everything feels despite the circumstances. The guards talk about everyday things. They share meals, exchange small jokes, and move through their shifts with a sense of routine. That normalcy makes the darker aspects stand out even more. It creates a contrast that feels real rather than exaggerated. Then comes a moment that changes the rhythm of the story. The arrival of a new inmate. The guards are informed ahead of time, but nothing prepares them for what they are about to see. When John Coffey is brought in, the atmosphere shifts in a way that is difficult to explain at first glance. He is a large man, physically imposing, yet his demeanor does not match his appearance. John Coffey is introduced in chains, escorted by multiple guards, but his behavior is calm, almost childlike. He does not resist. He does not show aggression. Instead, there is a quiet confusion in his eyes, as if he does not fully understand how he ended up in this place. That contrast between his size and his presence creates an immediate sense of curiosity. The crime he is accused of is horrific: the murder of 2 young girls. It is the kind of crime that usually leaves no room for doubt in the minds of those involved in the justice system. Yet something about coffee does not align with that image. Paul notices it first, not as a conclusion, but as a feeling that something does not add up. It is subtle, but it is there. As Coffee is settled into his cell, the reactions of the guards vary. Some remain cautious, focusing on the severity of the crime. Others, like Paul and Brutal, observe him more closely, trying to understand who he really is beyond the label placed on him. Coffee speaks softly, his voice carrying a tone that feels more afraid than threatening. He asks simple questions, showing a level of innocence that feels out of place. The pacing here is deliberate. The film does not rush to explain Coffee or reveal his role in the story. Instead, it allows you to sit with the uncertainty. That choice works because it pulls you into the same position as the characters. You are not given clear answers. You are asked to observe, to listen, and to form your own thoughts as the story unfolds. At this point, the foundation has been set. The environment is clear, the key players are introduced, and the tone is firmly established. There is a quiet tension running beneath everything, a sense that something significant is about to unfold. The story has not reached its central conflict yet, but the pieces are already in motion. And as Paul continues to watch Coffee from a distance, there is a growing feeling that this new arrival is going to challenge everything he believes about justice, guilt, and the role he plays on the Green Mile. Part 2. John Coffey's presence does not demand attention in an obvious way, yet it quietly reshapes the energy of the entire block. From the moment he settles into his cell, there is a shift that no one fully explains out loud. The guards continue their routine, keys clinking, doors sliding open and shut, footsteps echoing across the green floor, but something feels different. It is not tension in the usual sense. It is more like uncertainty, the kind that lingers in the background and refuses to settle. Coffee spends his first hours observing everything around him with a kind of cautious curiosity. His eyes move slowly, taking in details that most people would ignore. He does not pace like other inmates. He does not test boundaries or look for weaknesses. Instead, he sits quietly, hands resting on his knees, as if he is trying to understand the rules of a world that feels unfamiliar. That stillness draws attention because it contrasts sharply with what the guards expect from someone accused of such a brutal crime. Paul notices this early on. He has seen all kinds of men come through E-Block, each carrying their own version of anger, fear, or denial. Coffee does not fit into any of those patterns. There is no edge to him, no sense of hidden aggression waiting to surface. Even the way he speaks feels different. His voice is deep but gentle, each word delivered with care, as if he is afraid of saying the wrong thing. That detail might seem small, but in a place like this, tone can reveal more than actions. One of the first interactions between Paul and Coffee happens during a routine check. Paul approaches the cell with the same professionalism he shows everyone else, but there is a slight hesitation in his movement. He asks simple questions, making sure the new inmate understands the rules. Coffee listens closely, nodding in a way that feels respectful rather than submissive. When he responds, there is no defiance, only a quiet acknowledgement that he is where he is supposed to be. Then comes a moment that seems almost out of place in the environment. Coffee expresses fear, not of the guards or the execution that awaits him, but of the dark. He asks if the lights can be left on at night. The request is unexpected, especially coming from someone of his size. It reveals something vulnerable, something childlike that does not align with the image of a violent killer. Paul pauses, considering the request, and agrees without making it a big issue. It is a small act, but it sets a tone for how he will with Coffee moving forward. That interaction stays with Paul longer than he expects. As he walks away, there is a subtle shift in his expression. He is not questioning the system yet, but he is beginning to question the man in front of him. That distinction matters. It shows how the film builds its deeper themes slowly, without forcing them into the foreground too early. Meanwhile, the rest of the block continues to function, and Delacroix's connection with Mr. Jingles becomes a quiet source of comfort. The little mouse moves freely between cells, slipping through bars and corners with ease. Del treats him with care, offering bits of food and guiding him through simple tricks that bring brief moments of lightness to an otherwise heavy environment. The guards watch these interactions with a mix of amusement and disbelief. It is not something they expected to find in a place like this. Brutal, in particular, shows a softer side when it comes to Del and his tiny companion. Despite his imposing size, there is a patience in the way he observes them, as if he understands how important these small moments are. That balance between strength and empathy becomes a defining trait for him, reinforcing the idea that not everyone in this system is driven by cruelty or indifference. Percy, on the other hand, reacts very differently. He sees Mr. Jingles not as a harmless distraction, but as something to control or destroy. His attitude toward the inmates is rooted in a need to assert dominance, and the mouse becomes another opportunity for him to do that. There is a moment where Percy deliberately steps on the mouse, crushing it without hesitation. The act is sudden and cruel, and it shifts the atmosphere instantly. Del's reaction is immediate and heartbreaking. He breaks down in a way that feels raw and unfiltered, his grief over the loss of something so small highlighting just how little he has left to hold on to. The guards, even those who try to maintain distance, are visibly affected. Percy, however, shows no remorse. If anything, he seems satisfied with the reaction he has provoked. That contrast between empathy and cruelty becomes sharper in this moment, drawing a clear line between the characters. What happens next is where the story begins to reveal its deeper layer. Coffee, who has been observing everything quietly, asks to hold the mouse. At first, the request seems strange, especially given what just happened. There is hesitation from the guards, a natural caution about allowing any kind of interaction. But something in Coffee's tone convinces Paul to take a chance. Coffee takes the lifeless mouse in his large hands, and for a moment, nothing happens. The block falls into a rare silence, every movement paused as if the space itself is waiting. Then, slowly, something changes. Coffee's expression tightens, as if he is focusing on something internal, something that requires effort. When he opens his hands again, the mouse moves. It comes back to life, as if nothing had happened. The reaction from everyone is immediate and filled with disbelief. This is not something that can be explained within the normal rules of the world they understand. Paul watches closely, trying to make sense of what he just witnessed. His face does not show panic, but it does show confusion. This moment does not fit into his structured view of reality, and that creates a crack in the certainty he has carried for years. Coffee does not celebrate or draw attention to what he has done. Instead, he looks almost exhausted, as if the act took something out of him. There is no pride in his expression, no attempt to explain himself. He simply hands the mouse back, his focus returning to the quiet state he maintained before. That restraint adds to the mystery. It suggests that whatever ability he has is not something he uses lightly. From a storytelling perspective, this moment changes everything without needing to be loud or dramatic. It introduces a supernatural element, but it does so in a grounded way. The reaction of the characters feels real, rooted in confusion rather than immediate acceptance. That approach keeps the tone consistent, even as the story begins to explore themes that go beyond the ordinary. Paul cannot ignore what he has seen, but he also does not rush to conclusions. Instead, he carries that moment with him, allowing it to sit alongside everything else he knows about the system he works in. This internal conflict starts to build quietly, adding depth to his character without turning him into someone completely different overnight. As the days pass, Coffee continues to behave in ways that challenge expectations. He remains respectful, never raising his voice or causing trouble. He listens more than he speaks, and when he does speak, it is often with a simplicity that feels genuine. There is no sense of manipulation or hidden intent. If anything, he seems more concerned with the well-being of others than his own situation. That quality becomes more noticeable in his interactions with the guards. While most inmates keep their distance or show some level of resentment, Coffee approaches them with a kind of quiet trust. It is not naive, but it is open in a way that feels rare in that environment. Paul begins to respond to that openness, not by lowering his guard completely, but by allowing himself to engage on a more human level. At the same time, Percy's behavior continues to create tension. He resents the respect that Paul and the others show toward the inmates, seeing it as a weakness rather than a strength. His frustration grows, especially as he realizes that Coffee does not react to intimidation in the way he expects. That lack of response only fuels his need to provoke, setting the stage for further conflict. The block itself remains a place of routine, but the emotional landscape is shifting. The guards are no longer just managing inmates. They are beginning to question what they see, what they believe, and how they define justice within this system. That shift is subtle, but it is constant, building with each interaction and each unexplained moment. By the end of this segment, the story has moved beyond its initial setup and into something more complex. The introduction of Coffee's ability has opened a door that cannot easily be closed. Paul stands at the edge of that realization, not fully stepping through, but no longer able to ignore what lies beyond it. And as the days continue on the Green Mile, it becomes clear that this is no longer just a story about a prison. It is becoming a story about belief, doubt, and the fragile line between what is seen and what is understood. The days on E Block begin to settle into a rhythm again, but it is not the same rhythm that existed before John Coffey arrived. There is a quiet awareness now, something unspoken that lingers in every interaction. The guards carry on with their duties, yet their attention drifts more often toward Coffey's cell. It is not fear that draws them in. It is curiosity mixed with a growing sense that they are witnessing something they do not fully understand. Paul feels this shift more strongly than the others. He tries to keep his focus on routine, checking cells, maintaining order, ensuring that everything runs as it should. But his mind keeps returning to that moment with the mouse. He replays it in small fragments, searching for a logical explanation that fits within the boundaries of his experience. Each time he does, the same conclusion meets him. There is no simple answer. Coffey continues to behave in a way that deepens that uncertainty. He does not act like a man waiting for execution. There is no visible countdown in his actions, no desperation to change his fate. Instead, he moves through each day with a calm acceptance that feels almost unnatural. When he speaks, it is often about simple things. He asks about the weather, about the routines of the block, about the guards themselves. These are not the questions of someone plotting or resisting. They are the questions of someone trying to connect. One evening, as the block quiets down and the lights dim, Paul makes his usual rounds. The atmosphere is calm, the kind of calm that only comes when everyone has settled into their own space. When he reaches Coffey's cell, he pauses for a moment longer than usual. Coffey is sitting on his bunk, hands folded, eyes focused on something that is not immediately visible. There is a stillness in him that feels deeper than simple rest. Paul speaks first, keeping his tone steady. He asks if everything is all right, if there is anything Coffey needs. The question is routine, but the intention behind it is not. Coffey looks up, meeting Paul's gaze with a sincerity that feels direct. He says he is fine, but then adds something unexpected. He says he can feel things that do not belong to him. The words are simple, but they carry a weight that is difficult to ignore. Paul does not push for details. Instead, he listens, allowing Coffey to speak at his own pace. Coffey describes a kind of awareness, an ability to sense pain in others. He does not explain it in technical terms. He speaks about it the way someone might describe a feeling they have always lived with but never questioned. That approach makes it harder to dismiss. It does not sound like an excuse or a performance. It sounds like truth, at least from his perspective. This conversation marks a subtle turning point. Paul begins to see Coffey not just as an inmate with unusual behavior, but as someone carrying something beyond ordinary understanding. That realization does not come with immediate belief. It comes with a willingness to consider possibilities that he would have rejected before. It is a small shift, but it changes how he approaches everything that follows. At the same time, life on the block continues to move forward. Delacroix's bond with Mr. Jingles grows stronger, and the mouse becomes a regular presence during the quieter hours. The guards, despite themselves, begin to look forward to those small performances. It gives them something to focus on that is not tied to the harsh reality of their work. For Dell, it becomes more than a distraction. It becomes a source of comfort, a reminder that he is still capable of caring for something. Brutal takes on a protective role in this dynamic. He keeps a close eye on Percy, aware that his behavior could disrupt the fragile balance that has formed. There is a tension between them that continues to build, driven by Percy's inability to respect boundaries. He sees the kindness shown to the inmates as a weakness, something to exploit rather than preserve. That difference in perspective creates a quiet conflict that does not need loud arguments to be felt. One afternoon, the tension comes closer to the surface. Percy makes a point of asserting his authority in front of the others, pushing limits in small but deliberate ways. He taunts Dell, making comments designed to provoke a reaction. The guards step in before it escalates, but the damage is done. The atmosphere shifts, the sense of calm replaced by something more fragile. It becomes clear that Percy is not going to change, and that his presence will continue to be a source of disruption. Paul addresses this in his own way. He does not confront Percy with anger. Instead, he sets clear boundaries, making it known that certain behaviors will not be tolerated on his block. The conversation is firm, controlled, and direct. Percy listens, but there is a look in his eyes that suggests compliance rather than agreement. He understands the limits, but he does not respect them. That distinction matters, and it adds another layer of tension moving forward. As the days pass, Coffey's presence continues to influence the block in subtle ways. He remains consistent in his behavior, never showing signs of aggression or resentment. Instead, he observes, listens, and occasionally speaks in ways that reveal a deeper awareness of those around him. There is a moment where he comments on Paul's discomfort, sensing something that Paul has not shared with anyone else. Paul has been dealing with a personal issue, a physical pain that he has kept private. It is not something he discusses openly, especially in a work environment where vulnerability can be seen as weakness. Coffey, however, seems to sense it without being told. He brings it up gently, not as an accusation, but as a concern. The way he does it is careful, respectful, and unexpectedly accurate. This moment creates a pause in Paul's usual composure. He is not used to being seen in that way, especially by someone in Coffey's position. His first reaction is to deflect, to maintain control of the conversation. But there is something in Coffey's tone that makes it difficult to dismiss. It is not intrusive. It is understanding in a way that feels genuine. Coffey offers to help, though he does not explain how. The offer itself is enough to create a sense of tension. Paul is a man who relies on logic, on structure, on a clear understanding of cause and effect. Accepting help from someone he cannot fully explain challenges that foundation. It forces him to consider whether there are things beyond his control that he needs to acknowledge. He does not accept immediately. Instead, he steps back, choosing to observe rather than act. That decision reflects his character. He does not rush into the unknown. He takes his time, weighing possibilities, considering consequences. But the seed has been planted, and it begins to grow quietly in the background. Meanwhile, the reality of the block continues to move forward. Delacroix's execution date approaches, and the atmosphere begins to shift again. The routines become more structured, the preparations more deliberate. There is a sense of inevitability that settles over the space, a reminder that no matter what moments of light appear, the end of the Green Mile remains the same for those who walk it. Dell reacts to this in a way that feels deeply human. His anxiety grows, showing in small gestures and restless movements. He clings more tightly to Mr. Jingles, finding comfort in the presence of something that does not judge him. The guards, even those who try to maintain emotional distance, feel the weight of what is coming. It is not just another task. It is a moment that carries emotional consequences, whether they admit it or not. Paul feels this more than most. He has been through this process before, but it does not become easier with time. If anything, it becomes more complex. Each execution adds another layer to his understanding of the system he works within. It forces him to confront questions that do not have simple answers, questions about fairness, about guilt, and about the role he plays in carrying out these decisions. Coffee observes all of this quietly. He does not interfere, but his presence adds a new dimension to the situation. There is a sense that he understands more than he says, that he sees the emotional weight carried by everyone on the block. That awareness does not come with judgment. It comes with a kind of empathy that feels consistent with everything he has shown so far. As this part of the story comes to a close, the tension continues to build, not through loud conflict, but through quiet moments that carry deeper meaning. The block remains the same on the surface, but beneath that surface, everything is shifting. Relationships are changing, beliefs are being challenged, and the line between what is known and what is possible is becoming less clear. And with Delacroix's execution drawing closer, the story begins to move toward a moment that will test not only the characters, but the values they have held onto for so long. The approach of Delacroix's execution changes the atmosphere on E Block in a way that no one can ignore. The routine continues, but it feels heavier now, as if every sound carries more weight than before. Footsteps echo longer across the green floor, voices stay lower, and even the small moments of relief seem shorter. There is a shared awareness among the guards that something final is coming, and no amount of experience fully prepares them for it. Del himself becomes quieter as the date draws near. The nervous energy that once defined him shifts into something more contained, more inward. He spends more time sitting on his bunk, watching Mr. Jingles move around the cell with careful attention. That small creature becomes his anchor, a connection to something simple and alive in a place defined by endings. Every time the mouse responds to him, it brings a brief sense of calm, but it never lasts long. Hall observes this change with a steady but thoughtful presence. He does not offer false comfort or empty reassurance. Instead, he maintains a level of honesty that feels grounded. When he speaks to Del, his tone remains respectful, never dismissive of the fear that is clearly building. That approach does not remove the fear, but it gives Del something to hold on to. It allows him to face what is coming without feeling completely alone. Brutal mirrors this approach in his own way. His size and voice might suggest authority, but his actions reveal a deeper understanding of what Del is going through. He checks in without making it obvious, offering small gestures that show he is paying attention. Whether it is allowing a little extra time for Del to interact with Mr. Jingles or simply standing nearby without speaking, those moments matter more than direct words. Percy, however, continues to stand apart from this shared sense of empathy. His behavior becomes more erratic as the execution approaches, driven by a need to be involved in a way that elevates his sense of importance. He expresses a strong desire to take part in the execution process, not out of duty, but out of a disturbing curiosity. It is clear that for him, this is not about justice or responsibility. It is about control. Hall recognizes this immediately and tries to limit Percy's involvement. The conversation between them is tense, controlled on the surface but charged underneath. Percy insists on his right to participate, using his connections as leverage. Hall resists, knowing that Percy's presence during such a critical moment could lead to unnecessary complications. The balance of power in this situation is delicate, and it becomes clear that Paul cannot completely remove Percy from the process. As preparations begin, the procedures are handled with precision. The execution room is checked and rechecked, every detail examined to ensure that nothing goes wrong. The electric chair stands in place, silent and imposing, its presence a constant reminder of what is about to happen. The guards move through these preparations with practiced efficiency, but their expressions reveal the emotional cost behind that professionalism. Del's final days are marked by a mixture of fear and moments of quiet reflection. He begins to ask questions not about the process itself, but about what comes after. These are not questions anyone can answer with certainty, and the guards do not pretend otherwise. Instead, they listen, allowing him to speak without interruption. That act of listening becomes one of the most important things they can offer. Coffee watches all of this from his cell, his expression often difficult to read. There is a sadness in his eyes that feels deeper than the situation in front of him. It is as if he is carrying more than just his own fate. At times, he looks toward Dell with a kind of understanding that goes beyond words. He does not speak often, but when he does, his voice carries a weight that draws attention. One evening, as the block settles into a quieter state, Coffee speaks to Dell in a soft tone. He tells him not to be afraid, that there is something beyond the pain waiting for him. The words are simple, but they land with a surprising impact. Dell listens, his fear not disappearing, but shifting slightly. There is a moment where he seems to find a small measure of comfort in what Coffee says, even if he does not fully understand it. Paul witnesses this exchange and feels a growing tension within himself. He has always approached his role with a clear sense of duty, relying on structure and procedure to guide his actions. But moments like this challenge that framework. They introduce elements that cannot be measured or controlled, forcing him to reconsider what he believes about the system he serves. The day of the execution arrives with a quiet finality. There is no dramatic buildup, no sudden change in pace. Instead, everything moves forward with a steady, deliberate motion. The guards prepare themselves mentally, each finding their own way to cope with what they are about to do. Some focus on the technical aspects, others on maintaining composure. Paul carries a sense of responsibility that feels heavier than usual. Dell is escorted from his cell with care. His steps are slow, not because he resists, but because the weight of the moment is impossible to ignore. Mr. Jingles is placed in a small box, ensuring that he is safe and away from what is about to happen. That detail, small as it may seem, reflects the humanity that still exists within the process. Even in a place built around endings, there are efforts to preserve what little kindness can be found. As Dell is led down the Green Mile, the symbolism of that path becomes undeniable. Each step brings him closer to the end, the green floor stretching out beneath him like a quiet acknowledgement of what lies ahead. The guards walk alongside him, not as enforcers, but as witnesses. Their presence is steady, offering a form of support that does not rely on words. Inside the execution room, the atmosphere is controlled but heavy. The procedures are followed carefully, each step carried out with precision. Dell is seated in the chair, the straps secured, the preparations completed in silence. There is a moment where everything pauses, a brief space where time seems to slow. It is in that moment that the emotional weight of the situation becomes fully visible. Paul steps forward, his voice steady as he begins the formal process. He asks Dell if he has any last words. Dell's response is simple, filled with a mixture of fear and acceptance. He speaks about his regret, about his hope for something beyond this moment. His voice shakes, but he continues, finding the strength to say what he needs to say. What happens next is where the tension reaches its peak. Percy, who has managed to secure his place in the process, makes a critical error. Whether it is negligence or something more intentional is left unclear in the moment, but the result is immediate and devastating. The execution does not proceed as it should. Instead of a quick end, it becomes prolonged, filled with visible suffering that no one in the room can ignore. The reaction from the guards is immediate. Shock, anger, and disbelief spread across their faces as they realize what is happening. Paul tries to maintain control, but the situation is spiraling beyond what procedure can handle. The room, once controlled and orderly, becomes a space filled with chaos and helplessness. Dell's suffering is not presented for shock value. It is shown in a way that forces you to confront the reality of what can happen when something goes wrong. The guards are not detached observers in this moment. They are deeply affected, their roles shifting from enforcers to witnesses of something that should never have happened. Percy's reaction stands in stark contrast to everyone else. Instead of showing remorse, he appears unsettled in a different way, as if he did not fully anticipate the consequences of his actions. That lack of understanding adds another layer to his character, reinforcing the idea that he is not just cruel, but dangerously unaware of the impact he has. When the execution finally ends, the room is left in a state of heavy silence. No one speaks immediately. There is nothing to say that can make sense of what just occurred. The guards begin to move again, but their actions are slower, weighed down by the experience. Paul, in particular, carries a visible shift in his demeanor. The control he maintained throughout the process has been shaken. As they return to the block, the atmosphere feels different. It is not just sadness or regret. It is something deeper, something that lingers in the air and refuses to fade. The Green Mile has always been a place of endings, but this moment has changed how those endings are perceived. It has exposed the fragility of the system, the potential for harm even within a structured process. Coffee remains in his cell, watching quietly as the guards return. His expression reflects a deep sorrow, as if he has felt every moment of what just happened. He does not speak, but his presence adds a silent weight to the scene. It is clear that this event has affected him in a way that goes beyond observation. Paul, now carrying the memory of what just occurred, finds himself at a point where his beliefs are no longer as stable as they once were. The system he trusted has shown its flaws in the most painful way possible. And as he looks toward Coffee's cell, there is a growing sense that the answers he is searching for may lie in a place he never expected to look. The aftermath of Delacroix's execution does not fade quickly. It settles into the walls of E Block, into the routines, into the silence between conversations. The guards move through their duties, but there is a visible weight in their actions now. No one says it directly, yet everyone feels it. Something went wrong in a way that cannot be undone, and the memory of it refuses to soften. Paul carries that weight more heavily than the others. He replays the moment in his mind, not just as a sequence of events, but as a failure of responsibility. He trusted the process, trusted the people involved, and still, it ended in unnecessary suffering. That realization begins to chip away at the certainty he once held about his role. It does not break him, but it forces him to question whether doing his job is always the same as doing what is right. Brutal reacts differently, though the impact is just as deep. His frustration shows more openly, especially when it comes to Percy. There is a controlled anger in him, the kind that stays just below the surface but threatens to rise at any moment. He knows what Percy did, whether by carelessness or intention, crossed a line that should never be crossed. Holding back that anger becomes part of his daily effort, and it is clear that it takes everything he has. Percy, for his part, does not show the kind of remorse that might ease the tension. Instead, he withdraws slightly, but not in a way that suggests guilt. It feels more like avoidance, as if he is trying to distance himself from the consequences without fully acknowledging them. That reaction only deepens the resentment from the others. It is not just about what happened. It is about the absence of accountability. The block itself becomes quieter. Even the small moments that once brought relief seem muted. Mr. Jingles continues to move through the space, but without Dell, there is a noticeable absence. The mouse still performs its little routines, but the energy around those moments has changed. What once felt like a break from reality now feels like a reminder of what has been lost. Coffee remains a steady presence through all of this. He does not draw attention to himself, yet his awareness of the emotional shift around him is clear. He watches the guards with a kind of understanding that feels deeper than simple observation. There is a sadness in him that mirrors what the others are feeling, but it is expressed in a quieter, more contained way. Paul finds himself drawn toward Coffee more often, not out of curiosity alone, but out of a growing need to understand. The moment with the mouse and the conversation they shared earlier continue to linger in his thoughts. Combined with what just happened to Dell, these experiences begin to form a connection in his mind, one that he cannot fully explain but cannot ignore either. One evening, as the block settles into its usual nighttime rhythm, Paul makes his rounds with a slower pace. When he reaches Coffee's cell, he pauses again, this time with less hesitation. Coffee looks up, meeting his gaze in that same calm, direct way. There is no tension between them, only a quiet recognition that something needs to be addressed. Paul does not approach the conversation with authority. Instead, he speaks as someone searching for answers. He brings up the pain Coffee mentioned before, the discomfort he has been dealing with privately. It is not an easy thing for him to admit, but the circumstances have shifted his perspective. He is no longer trying to maintain the same distance he once did. Coffee listens carefully, his expression focused but gentle. When Paul finishes speaking, Coffee offers to help again, this time with a clearer sense of intention. He explains that he can take the pain away, though he does not describe how in any detail. The simplicity of his explanation makes it more difficult to dismiss. It does not sound like a claim meant to impress. It sounds like something he believes is simply part of what he can do. There is a moment where Paul hesitates, weighing the decision in his mind. Everything in his experience tells him to rely on logic, to avoid stepping into something he cannot control. But the events of the past days have already begun to challenge that approach. The memory of Dell's suffering, combined with what he witnessed earlier, pushes him toward a different choice. He agrees, though not without caution. The setting remains controlled, the other guards nearby, aware that something unusual is about to happen. Coffee steps closer, his movements slow and deliberate. When he reaches out, there is no force in the gesture, only a quiet intention. The moment that follows is difficult to describe in simple terms. Coffee places his hands on Paul, and there is an immediate sense of focus in his expression. It is as if he is concentrating on something beyond the physical, something that requires effort on a different level. Paul feels a shift, not sudden or overwhelming, but noticeable. The pain that has been constant begins to ease, fading in a way that does not match any medical explanation. Then, just as quickly as it begins, the moment changes. Coffee pulls back, his body reacting as if he has taken on something heavy. He exhales sharply, releasing what looks like a dark, almost intangible substance from his mouth. The visual is unsettling, not because it is violent, but because it defies understanding. It suggests a transfer, a movement of something from one person to another. Paul steps back, processing what just happened. The pain is gone. Completely gone. There is no gradual relief, no lingering discomfort. It has simply disappeared. He looks at Coffee, searching for an explanation, but Coffee does not offer one. He only appears tired, as if the act has drained him in a way that cannot be easily recovered from. The other guards react with a mix of disbelief and concern. Brutal, in particular, watches closely, his protective instincts kicking in. He does not fully understand what he just saw, but he recognizes that it is not something ordinary. The room holds a tension that is different from anything they have experienced before. It is not fear in the traditional sense. It is something closer to awe, mixed with uncertainty. This moment changes the dynamic in a significant way. What was once a possibility in Paul's mind now becomes something real, something that cannot be explained away. Coffee is no longer just an unusual inmate. He is someone with an ability that challenges the very framework of how they understand the world around them. Paul's internal conflict deepens. He begins to question not only Coffee's situation, but the system that placed him there. If Coffee can do what he just did, if he carries this kind of power, then the question of his guilt becomes more complicated. It is no longer just about evidence or testimony. It becomes a question of whether the truth they accepted is complete. At the same time, the reality of their environment does not change. Coffee is still an inmate on death row. The procedures, the schedules, the expectations all remain in place. The system does not adjust itself based on unexplained events. That creates a tension between what Paul now knows and what he is expected to do. As the days continue, this tension begins to influence how Paul interacts with everything around him. He becomes more observant, more willing to question details that he might have overlooked before. He watches Coffee more closely, not with suspicion, but with a desire to understand the full extent of who he is. Coffee, however, does not change his behavior. He remains consistent, calm, and quietly aware of those around him. There is no sense that he is trying to prove anything or draw attention to himself. If anything, he seems more focused on the well-being of others than on his own situation. That consistency reinforces the idea that whatever he is, it is not something built on deception. Percy's presence continues to create friction, though in a different way now. The events surrounding Dell's execution have not gone unnoticed, and while there are no immediate consequences for him, the respect he once demanded has eroded. The other guards interact with him out of necessity rather than acceptance. That shift does not go unnoticed by Percy, and it begins to affect his behavior in subtle ways. The block, once defined by routine alone, now feels like a place where something larger is unfolding beneath the surface. The guards are no longer just managing inmates. They are navigating a situation that challenges their understanding of justice, responsibility, and belief. Each day brings new questions and fewer clear answers. And as Paul stands at the center of it all, carrying the knowledge of what coffee has done, he begins to realize that the path ahead is not going to follow the structure he once relied on. It is going to require choices that cannot be guided by procedure alone. What happened between Paul and coffee does not stay contained to that single moment. It lingers, not just in Paul's mind, but in the way he carries himself afterward. There is a noticeable shift in his posture, in the way he looks at the world around him. The pain that once distracted him is gone, but in its place is something more complex. Relief is there, but it is mixed with a growing sense of responsibility that feels heavier than before. He does not speak about it openly at first. The experience is too unusual, too far outside the boundaries of what he has accepted as real. Instead, he observes, taking time to process what it means. He watches coffee with a different kind of attention now, not as a guard monitoring an inmate, but as someone trying to understand a presence that does not fit into any clear category. Brutal, however, is not the kind of person to leave things unspoken for long. He approaches Paul in a quieter moment, his expression serious but controlled. He asks direct questions, not out of suspicion, but out of concern. What he saw was not something he can easily ignore, and he needs to understand how Paul is handling it. Their conversation is grounded, honest, and free of exaggeration. Paul does not try to explain everything. He simply states what he felt, what changed, and what he cannot yet explain. That honesty strengthens the trust between them. Brutal does not fully understand what happened, but he trusts Paul's judgment. That trust becomes important, because it means Paul is not facing this shift alone. It creates the sense of unity among the guards, even as the situation becomes more complicated. Coffee, meanwhile, remains unchanged in his outward behavior. He does not reference what he did for Paul, nor does he act as if anything significant occurred. That restraint adds to the complexity of his character. There is no attempt to gain favor or leverage. If anything, he seems almost indifferent to the impact his actions have, as though helping others is simply part of who he is, not something that needs recognition. This pattern becomes clearer in the days that follow. Coffee continues to show an awareness of the emotional states of those around him. He notices tension before it becomes visible, responds to discomfort before it is expressed. It is not always through direct action. Sometimes it is just through quiet words or a look that acknowledges what someone else is feeling. That level of perception creates a sense of unease, not because it is threatening, but because it is so precise. Paul begins to connect these observations with the larger question that has been forming in his mind. If coffee has this ability, if he can sense and even take on the pain of others, then the narrative surrounding his crime becomes harder to accept without question. The details of the case, once taken at face value, now feel incomplete. There are gaps that Paul cannot ignore, even if he does not yet know how to fill them. At the same time, the reality of their environment continues to press forward. Another inmate arrives on the block, and his presence brings a completely different kind of energy. William Wild Bill Wharton enters with a level of chaos that disrupts any sense of calm that has been established. From the moment he is brought in, it is clear that he is unpredictable, driven by impulses that are difficult to control. His behavior contrasts sharply with Coffee's. Where Coffee is quiet and contained, Wild Bill is loud, aggressive, and constantly testing limits. He does not settle into the routine of the block. He pushes against it, creating disturbances that require immediate attention. The guards are forced to respond quickly, using restraint and authority to maintain order. Paul handles this situation with the same steady approach he applies to everything else. He does not escalate unnecessarily, but he does not allow Wild Bill's behavior to go unchecked. There is a firmness in his actions that reinforces his role as the one in control, even as the environment becomes more unstable. Wild Bill's presence introduces a new layer of tension. His interactions with the other inmates are unpredictable, and his disregard for boundaries creates an atmosphere where anything can happen at any moment. The guards remain on high alert, aware that this is not a situation that will resolve itself quietly. Coffee's reaction to Wild Bill is subtle but significant. He becomes more withdrawn, his usual calm replaced by a visible discomfort. It is not fear in the traditional sense. It is something deeper, as if Wild Bill's presence triggers a reaction that goes beyond surface-level awareness. Coffee avoids direct interaction, keeping his distance in a way that suggests he understands something about Wild Bill that others do not. Paul notices this change and adds it to the growing list of observations he cannot ignore. Each new detail builds on the last, forming a picture that is still incomplete but becoming harder to dismiss. Coffee's abilities, his behavior, his reactions, all point towards something that challenges the narrative of his guilt. One night, the tension reaches a point where it can no longer be contained. Wild Bill creates a disturbance that escalates quickly, forcing the guards to intervene with full control. The situation is chaotic, voices raised, movement sharp and urgent. In the middle of it, there is a moment where control slips, just slightly, but enough to reveal how fragile the balance really is. Coffee reacts in a way that draws immediate attention. He becomes visibly distressed, his usual composure breaking under the pressure of the situation. His response is not aggressive. It is emotional, almost overwhelmed, as if he is absorbing more than just the noise and movement. Around him, the intensity of his reaction stands out, especially when compared to how he has handled everything else so far. The guards manage to restore order, but the impact of the moment remains. Wild Bill is restrained, the immediate threat contained, but the atmosphere does not return to normal. There is a lingering sense that something deeper has been revealed, even if it is not fully understood yet. Paul reflects on this as the night settles back into quiet. He considers the possibility that Coffee's abilities are not just about healing, but about connection. That he experiences the world in a way that is fundamentally different, taking in more than others can see or feel. If that is true, then his reaction to Wild Bill could mean something important, something that points toward a truth that has not yet been uncovered. This realization does not bring clarity. It brings more questions. But those questions are now driving Paul's actions in a way that routine no longer can. He begins to look beyond the surface, to consider possibilities that he would have dismissed before. It is not a complete shift, but it is enough to change the direction of his thinking. The rest of the block continues to function, but the sense of normalcy is gone. Every interaction now carries an undercurrent of uncertainty. The guards are no longer just managing inmates. They are navigating a situation where the rules they rely on may not be enough to explain what is happening around them. Coffee remains at the center of this shift, not because he seeks attention, but because everything about him challenges the structure of the world he has been placed in. His presence raises questions that cannot be easily answered, and those questions are beginning to shape the choices that Paul and the others will have to make. As this part of the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the path ahead is not just about maintaining order. It is about uncovering truth, even when that truth does not fit within the boundaries of what is expected. Wild Bill Wharton does not settle into E-block. He spreads through it like a disruption that refuses to be contained. Every movement he makes feels unpredictable, and that unpredictability forces the guards to stay constantly alert. It is not just about controlling him physically. It is about anticipating what he might do next, knowing that hesitation could lead to something worse. His behavior swings between loud defiance and sudden stillness, and that inconsistency makes him difficult to read. One moment he is shouting, testing the patience of everyone around him, and the next he is quiet, watching with a kind of unsettling focus. That shift creates a tension that sits in the background, always present, never fully resolved. Paul approaches him with the same controlled authority he uses with every inmate, but it is clear that this situation requires more attention. Wild Bill does not respond to calm in the same way others do. He sees it as something to challenge, something to push against. That forces Paul to adjust, not by becoming aggressive, but by becoming more precise in how he enforces boundaries. Brutal takes on a more active role in managing Wild Bill. His presence alone carries weight, and he uses that to keep situations from escalating further than they need to. There is a quiet understanding between him and Paul, a coordination that does not require constant communication. They move in sync, responding to Wild Bill's behavior with a balance of firmness and restraint. Despite their efforts, the energy on the block shifts again. The sense of control that once defined the space now feels more fragile. Every interaction carries the possibility of escalation, and that possibility changes how everyone behaves. Conversations become shorter, movements more deliberate. Even the moments of silence feel different, as if they are waiting to be broken. Coffee reacts to this change in a way that becomes harder to ignore. His discomfort grows, not in a loud or dramatic way, but through small signs that accumulate over time. He withdraws further, his usual calm replaced by a kind of quiet distress that shows in his posture, in the way he avoids looking toward Wild Bill's cell. It is as if he senses something that others cannot fully see. Paul notices this pattern and begins to connect it with everything else he has observed. Coffee's reactions are not random. They are consistent with the idea that he experiences more than what is visible. If that is true, then Wild Bill represents something beyond just a disruptive presence. He represents something darker, something that Coffee cannot distance himself from even if he tries. This realization sits heavily with Paul. It adds another layer to the questions already forming in his mind. If Coffee can sense pain, if he can take it away, then what does he sense when he looks at Wild Bill? And more importantly, what does that mean for the story that placed Coffee on death row in the first place? The tension builds gradually, leading to a moment that shifts everything again. It happens during a routine night, when the block is expected to be at its quietest. The guards move through their checks, maintaining the structure that keeps everything in order. But Wild Bill does not follow that structure. He creates a disturbance that feels different from the others, more focused, more deliberate. He begins to provoke, not just with noise, but with words that cut deeper. He targets weaknesses, pushes at emotional limits, testing how far he can go before someone reacts. The guards step in quickly, trying to contain the situation before it escalates further. There is a struggle, controlled but intense, as they work to restrain him without losing control. In the middle of this, Coffee reacts again, but this time the reaction is stronger. He becomes visibly overwhelmed, his breathing heavier, his expression filled with a kind of pain that does not match the physical situation. It is as if he is experiencing something beyond what is happening in front of him. The intensity of his response draws immediate attention. Paul steps toward him, trying to understand what is happening, but Coffee cannot explain it in clear terms. He speaks in fragments, describing a feeling that is too much to contain. The words are not structured, but the emotion behind them is clear. He is not just reacting to noise or movement. He is reacting to something deeper, something tied directly to Wild Bill. The situation stabilizes as the guards regain full control over Wild Bill, but the impact of the moment remains. Coffee slowly returns to his usual state, but the strain is visible. It takes time for him to settle, and even then, there is a lingering tension that does not fully fade. Paul cannot ignore what he has seen. The connection between Coffee and Wild Bill is no longer a possibility. It is something real, something that demands attention. The question is not whether there is a link, but what that link means. As the night moves forward, Paul begins to think differently about the case that brought Coffee here. He recalls the details, the evidence, the certainty that surrounded it. At the time, it all seemed clear, straightforward, resolved. But now, with everything he has witnessed, that clarity begins to break apart. He considers the possibility that something was missed, that the story they accepted was incomplete. It is not an easy thought to entertain, especially given the weight of the accusation against Coffee. But the more he reflects, the harder it becomes to dismiss. Brutal notices this shift in Paul. He sees it in the way Paul pauses more often, in the way he looks at Coffee with a different kind of focus. Their conversations begin to reflect this change, moving beyond routine discussions into something more reflective. They talk about what they have seen, about what it might mean, about the possibility that they are dealing with something far more complex than they initially believed. These conversations are not filled with certainty. They are filled with questions, with careful consideration of what they know and what they do not. That approach keeps them grounded, even as the situation becomes more uncertain. They do not jump to conclusions, but they also do not ignore the evidence in front of them. Wild Bill continues to act as a source of disruption, but now he also represents something else. He becomes a focal point for the questions surrounding coffee. Every interaction, every reaction adds another piece to a puzzle that is slowly coming together. Coffee, for his part, does not try to explain the connection. He does not accuse, does not point fingers. He simply reacts in ways that suggest he understands more than he is able to express. That restraint makes his behavior more powerful, not less. It forces those around him to interpret rather than be told. The block, once defined by routine and procedure, now feels like a place where something hidden is beginning to surface. The guards are no longer just maintaining order. They are standing at the edge of a truth that has not yet been fully revealed. And as Paul looks between Coffee and Wild Bill, the distance between them no longer feels like a coincidence. It feels like something that is waiting to be understood, something that could change everything if it is finally brought into the light. The connection between John Coffey and Wild Bill Wharton does not reveal itself all at once. It builds slowly, through small moments that feel disconnected at first but begin to form a pattern the more Paul pays attention. Each reaction Coffey has around Wild Bill carries a weight that cannot be explained by simple discomfort. It feels specific, targeted, as if something unseen is passing between them. Paul becomes more deliberate in his observation. He watches not just what happens, but how it happens. The timing of Coffey's reactions, the intensity, the way his body responds before anything obvious occurs. It is not random. There is a rhythm to it, something that suggests a deeper link. That realization begins to shift Paul's focus from managing the present to understanding the past. Wild Bill, meanwhile, continues to move through the block with a reckless energy that keeps everyone on edge. He laughs at moments that do not call for humor, speaks in ways designed to provoke, and shows no concern for consequences. His behavior is not just disruptive. It feels intentional, as if he enjoys the tension he creates. That attitude makes him difficult to contain, even when he is physically restrained. There is a moment during one of the quieter hours when Wild Bill's behavior takes a different turn. Instead of shouting or resisting, he becomes unusually calm. He sits in his cell, eyes focused, a faint smile forming that does not reach his eyes. It is a subtle change, but it stands out because it breaks his usual pattern. Paul notices it immediately, the way the energy shifts without any clear reason. At the same time, Coffey reacts again. His posture tightens, his breathing changes, and there is a visible strain in his expression. He looks toward Wild Bill's cell, not directly, but with a kind of awareness that feels instinctive. It is as if he is responding to something that has not yet become visible to anyone else. Paul steps closer, trying to understand what is happening, but Coffey does not speak right away. When he finally does, his words come slowly, as if he is trying to process something too large to put into simple language. He mentions feeling something bad, something that does not belong. The phrasing is vague, but the emotion behind it is clear. There is fear there, not for himself, but for something else. This moment pushes Paul further toward a realization he has been resisting. The idea that Coffey's abilities are not just about healing, but about perception, about seeing and feeling things that others cannot. If that is true, then his reactions to Wild Bill could be pointing towards something specific, something tied to the crime that brought Coffey here. The thought is unsettling not because it is impossible, but because it changes everything. If Coffey is not who they believe he is, then the system that placed him here has made a mistake. And not just any mistake, but one with irreversible consequences. That possibility begins to weigh on Paul in a way that is difficult to ignore. He starts to revisit the details of the case in his mind. The crime itself, the evidence, the way it was presented. At the time, it all seemed clear, supported by facts that left little room for doubt. But now, with everything he has seen, those facts feel less solid. They still exist, but they no longer feel complete. Brutal becomes part of this reflection as well. Paul shares his thoughts, not as conclusions, but as questions. He lays out the connections he has noticed, the patterns that are forming. Brutal listens carefully, his expression serious but open. He does not dismiss the idea, but he does not accept it outright either. He understands the weight of what they are considering, and he approaches it with the same caution Paul does. Their conversation is grounded in reality, focused on what they can observe and what they can confirm. They do not jump ahead. They take each piece of information and examine it, looking for consistency, for something that holds under scrutiny. That approach keeps them from losing themselves in speculation, even as the situation becomes more complex. Coffee, meanwhile, remains at the center of it all without trying to be. His behavior does not change to match the growing attention. He continues to move through each day with the same quiet presence, responding to others with a level of care that feels consistent. That consistency becomes one of the strongest arguments in his favor. It is difficult to reconcile that kind of behavior with the crime he is accused of. Wild Bill, on the other hand, begins to show more cracks in his unpredictable nature. There are moments where his behavior feels less like random chaos and more like something controlled, something intentional beneath the surface. His eyes linger longer on certain people. His words carry hints that suggest knowledge he should not have. These details are small, but they begin to add up. One evening, the tension reaches a point where it demands attention. Wild Bill starts speaking in a way that feels different from his usual provocations. His tone shifts, becoming more focused, more deliberate. He says things that seem out of place, references that do not match the current situation. It is as if he is revealing pieces of something without fully understanding why. Coffee reacts immediately, his distress rising sharply. He begins to speak as well, but his words are fragmented, overlapping with Wild Bill's in a way that creates a strange, unsettling rhythm. The two of them are not having a direct conversation, but there is a connection there, something passing between them that the others cannot fully grasp. The guards step in, trying to restore order, but the moment has already left its mark. Paul stands still for a brief second, taking in everything he just witnessed. The connection is no longer subtle. It is visible, undeniable in its intensity. Whatever ties Coffee and Wild Bill together is not a coincidence. It is something real, something that points toward a truth that has not yet been fully uncovered. After the situation is contained, the block returns to a quieter state, but the tension does not fade. It settles into the space, into the minds of those who witnessed it. Paul feels it more than anyone. The pieces are no longer scattered. They are beginning to form a picture, one that challenges everything he thought he understood. He looks at Coffee with a different perspective now, not as someone who might be misunderstood, but as someone who might be entirely innocent. That shift is significant, and it carries consequences that cannot be ignored. If he is right, then the path Coffee is on leads to an outcome that should never happen. At the same time, Wild Bill becomes more than just a disruptive presence. He becomes a key part of the question, someone whose behavior might hold answers that have been overlooked. The way he acts, the things he says, the reactions he provokes, all begin to take on new meaning. Paul knows that he cannot act on suspicion alone. He needs something more, something concrete that can support what he is beginning to believe. But the system he works within is not designed for uncertainty. It is built on decisions that have already been made, on outcomes that are expected to follow a set path. This creates a conflict that is no longer internal. It begins to influence how Paul sees his role, how he approaches each decision moving forward. He is no longer just a guard maintaining order. He is someone standing at the edge of a truth that could change everything, if he can find a way to bring it into the light. And as he watches Coffee sit quietly in his cell, carrying a weight that no one else can fully understand, the urgency of that truth begins to grow stronger with each passing moment. The tension that has been building between Coffee and Wild Bill no longer feels like a background element. It starts to dominate the emotional space of E-Block, shaping how every moment unfolds. Paul can feel it in the air, in the pauses between conversations, in the way the guards glance toward the cells without realizing they are doing it. Something is getting closer to the surface, and everyone senses it even if they cannot define it. Paul becomes more focused, more intentional with his time on the block. He is no longer just observing behavior. He is studying it, looking for connections that can confirm what he is beginning to believe. Every detail matters now. The way Wild Bill reacts to certain words, The way coffee responds before anything is said, the timing of each shift in energy. These are not coincidences anymore. They are signals. Wild Bill continues to act out, but there are moments where his behavior shifts into something more controlled, more deliberate. During these moments, his eyes carry a different kind of awareness, one that feels sharper and more calculated. It is in these instances that Paul starts to see something beneath the surface, something that does not match the chaotic persona Wild Bill presents most of the time. One afternoon, during a period of relative calm, Wild Bill begins speaking again, but not in the loud, aggressive way the guards have come to expect. His voice lowers, his words becoming more focused. He starts to reference things that seem disconnected from the present, fragments of thoughts that do not belong to the moment. At first, it sounds like nonsense, but as he continues, there is a pattern hidden within it. Paul listens closely, his attention narrowing. The fragments begin to form images, not clear ones, but enough to suggest something specific. There are mentions of a place, of fear, of something that happened quickly and violently. The words are not structured like a confession. They are scattered, almost accidental, but they carry a weight that is difficult to ignore. At the same time, Coffee reacts with a level of intensity that surpasses anything seen before. He grips the bars of his cell, his body tense, his face filled with a kind of pain that goes beyond physical discomfort. It is as if he is reliving something tied directly to the words Wild Bill is speaking. The connection between them becomes impossible to dismiss in that moment. Paul steps closer, his focus entirely on what is unfolding. He does not interrupt. He does not try to control the situation immediately. Instead, he listens, allowing the moment to develop. There is a sense that stopping it too soon could mean losing something important, something that might finally bring clarity. Wild Bill continues, his voice shifting between tones, sometimes almost playful, other times dark and unsettling. The fragments of his speech begin to align more clearly, forming a picture that points toward the crime Coffee was accused of. The details are not presented in a straightforward way, but they are there, hidden within the chaos of his words. Coffee's reaction intensifies. He begins to speak as well, his voice overlapping with Wild Bill's in a way that creates a strange, almost synchronized rhythm. He describes feelings, sensations, moments that mirror what Wild Bill is hinting at. It is not a direct accusation, but it feels like a reflection, as if he is experiencing the same event from a different perspective. The guards exchange glances, uncertainty visible in their expressions. They do not fully understand what is happening, but they recognize that it is significant. Brutal moves slightly closer to Paul, his presence steady, ready to act if the situation becomes unstable. There is a shared understanding that this moment matters, even if they cannot yet explain why. Then, without warning, the intensity breaks. Wild Bill shifts back into his usual erratic behavior, laughing loudly as if nothing unusual just occurred. The sudden change is jarring, cutting through the tension and leaving behind a sense of confusion. Coffee releases his grip on the bars, his body relaxing slightly, though the strain remains visible in his face. The moment ends, but its impact does not. Paul steps back, his mind racing as he processes what he just witnessed. The pieces that have been forming now begin to align in a way that feels undeniable. The connection between Coffee and Wild Bill is not just emotional or instinctive. It is tied to something specific, something that points directly to the truth of what happened. He begins to consider the possibility that Coffee did not commit the crime he is accused of, that instead he was present in a different way, perhaps trying to help, perhaps arriving too late. The idea is difficult to accept, not because it lacks evidence, but because of what it implies about the system that judged him. Brutal approaches, his expression serious. He does not ask if Paul saw it. He knows. Instead, he asks what Paul thinks it means. The question is direct, but it carries a weight that reflects the gravity of the situation. This is not just speculation anymore. It is something that could change everything. Paul answers carefully, choosing his words with precision. He does not claim certainty, but he lays out what he believes they just witnessed. The connection, the shared experience, the way Coffee reacted to Wild Bill's words. It all points in one direction, even if they do not yet have proof that can be used within the system they operate in. Their conversation is interrupted by the return of routine. The block settles back into its usual pattern, but the sense of normalcy is gone. Every action now feels connected to what just happened. The guards move through their duties, but their focus is divided, their thoughts returning again and again to the moment they cannot fully explain. Coffee retreats into his quiet state, but there is a visible exhaustion in him now. Whatever he experienced took something out of him, leaving him more withdrawn than before. He does not speak about it, does not try to explain. He simply sits, carrying the weight of something that no one else can fully understand. Wild Bill, on the other hand, continues to act as if nothing has changed. He laughs, provokes, disrupts, maintaining the persona that has defined him since his arrival. But now, there is a difference in how he is perceived. The guards no longer see him as just a chaotic presence. They see him as someone who might be hiding something far more serious beneath that chaos. Paul begins to feel the pressure of time in a way he has not before. Coffee's execution is not far off, and the system is already in motion. Decisions have been made, processes set in place. If there is a truth that needs to be uncovered, it has to happen soon. That urgency begins to shape his actions, pushing him to move beyond observation. He considers what can be done, what steps can be taken within the limits of his position. The system does not allow for easy reconsideration, especially not based on experiences that cannot be easily explained. He needs something more, something that can stand up to scrutiny, something that can challenge the narrative that has already been accepted. At the same time, he begins to question whether the system is capable of recognizing the kind of truth he is dealing with. What he has seen does not fit into reports or testimonies. It exists outside of those structures, making it difficult to present in a way that would be taken seriously. This creates a conflict that feels almost impossible to resolve. On one side, there is the duty he has carried for years, the responsibility to follow procedure and uphold the system. On the other, there is the growing belief that the system has made a mistake, one that will lead to an irreversible outcome if not addressed. As Paul stands on the Green Mile, looking down the path that has led so many men to their end, he realizes that this time is different. This time, the path may not be leading where it should. And if he does nothing, he becomes part of that outcome in a way that he can no longer justify. The story has now reached a point where observation is no longer enough. The truth is close, but it remains just out of reach, waiting for something to bring it fully into the light. The weight of what Paul now suspects begins to shape every decision he makes on E-Block. The routine still exists, the structure still holds, but for him, everything feels different. Each step along the Green Mile carries a question that refuses to settle. If John Coffey is innocent, then every moment that passes brings him closer to an end that should not happen. Paul does not rush into action. He knows that acting without clarity could make things worse, not better. Instead, he focuses on gathering something more solid, something that can move beyond intuition and into certainty. The challenge is that everything he has witnessed so far exists outside the kind of proof the system recognizes. It is real to him, but it is not something he can present in a report. Brutal stays close in this process, offering support without pushing for answers. Their conversations become more frequent, more focused. They go over the details again and again, testing each possibility, looking for anything that can confirm or challenge what they believe. There is a discipline in how they approach it, a refusal to let emotion take control, even as the stakes continue to rise. Coffey, meanwhile, remains at the center of it all, though he does nothing to place himself there. His behavior stays consistent, his presence quiet and steady. But there is a visible fatigue in him now, a sense that whatever he carries is becoming heavier. He speaks less, rests more, and when he does look at the guards, there is something in his expression that feels like acceptance rather than resistance. That acceptance unsettles Paul more than anything else. It suggests that Coffey understands his situation in a way that goes beyond fear or denial. It raises the possibility that he knows something about what is coming, something he has already made peace with. That idea creates a tension in Paul that is difficult to ignore. It makes the urgency feel sharper, more immediate. The turning point comes through an unexpected direction. Paul's wife, Melinda, has been struggling with a serious illness, one that has been affecting her more as time passes. It is something Paul has kept separate from his work, a personal burden he carries quietly. But now, with everything he has seen, the line between his personal life and his work begins to blur. The thought comes to him slowly, not as a clear plan, but as a possibility that grows stronger the more he considers it. If coffee can heal, if what happened to him was real, then maybe that ability extends beyond the walls of the prison. Maybe it can do more than just remove pain. The idea feels risky, uncertain, but it also feels like something he cannot ignore. He brings this to Brutal, explaining the situation with careful honesty. The conversation is tense, not because of disagreement, but because of what it implies. Taking an inmate off the block, even temporarily, is a serious breach of protocol. It is not just against the rules. It carries consequences that could affect all of them. But the possibility of what coffee might be able to do changes how they view that risk. They do not decide immediately. They take time to think it through, to consider the logistics, the potential outcomes, the consequences if something goes wrong. It is not a decision driven by impulse. It is a calculated risk, one that requires trust in something they cannot fully explain. Eventually, they agree to move forward, not because they are certain, but because the alternative feels like ignoring something too important to dismiss. The plan is simple in structure but complex in execution. They will take Coffee out of the prison under controlled conditions, bring him to Paul's home, and see if he can help Melinda. The night they choose is quiet, the block settled into its usual rhythm. The guards involved move carefully, each step planned, each action measured. There is no room for mistakes. The tension is high, but it is controlled, focused. This is not chaos. It is a deliberate decision to step outside the boundaries of the system for a reason they believe is justified. Coffee is brought out of his cell without resistance. He does not ask questions, does not show surprise. It is as if he understands what is happening before it is explained. That awareness adds to the sense that he is not just reacting to events, but somehow connected to them in a deeper way. The journey to Paul's home is quiet. No one speaks more than necessary. The weight of what they are doing hangs over them, but there is also a sense of purpose that keeps them moving forward. This is not just about testing an idea. It is about seeking an answer that could change everything. When they arrive, the atmosphere shifts again. The setting is no longer controlled in the same way as the prison. It is personal, familiar to Paul, but unfamiliar to the others. Melinda lies in bed, her condition clearly affecting her. The room carries a sense of quiet struggle, the kind that comes from something that has been building over time. Coffee approaches her slowly, his movements careful, respectful. He does not rush, does not hesitate. There is a calm in him that feels steady, even in this unfamiliar environment. When he reaches her, he pauses for a moment, as if preparing himself for what he is about to do. Paul watches closely, his focus entirely on this moment. This is not just about his wife. It is about everything that has led them here, every question, every doubt, every possibility. The outcome of this moment could confirm what he believes or challenge it completely. Coffee places his hands on Melinda, and the room seems to hold its breath. There is no dramatic buildup, no sudden change. Instead, there is a quiet intensity, the same kind of focus Paul experienced before. Coffee's expression tightens, his body reacting as if he is taking on something heavy. What follows is both familiar and different. The same transfer of pain, the same visible strain, but on a larger scale. Coffee absorbs something from Melinda, something that has been affecting her deeply. The process is not quick, and it is not easy. It takes time, effort, and it leaves Coffee visibly drained. Then, just as before, he releases it, expelling that same dark, intangible substance. The moment is unsettling, but it is also clear in its outcome. Melinda's condition changes. The strain in her face eases, her breathing steadies, and there is a visible shift that cannot be explained by anything ordinary. Paul steps closer, his focus shifting from Coffee to his wife. The change is real. It is immediate. The illness that once defined her state is gone, replaced by a clarity that feels almost impossible. The realization hits him fully in that moment. What coffee can do is not limited. It is something far beyond anything he has ever encountered. The room fills with a mixture of relief, disbelief, and something deeper that is harder to define. Brutal watches in silence, his expression reflecting the same realization. This is not speculation anymore. It is proof, at least for them. Proof that coffee is not what the system claims he is. But even in this moment, there is a shadow that remains. Coffee is exhausted, more than before, his body struggling under the weight of what he has taken on. And as he looks at Paul, there is a sadness in his eyes that suggests this act, as powerful as it is, comes with a cost that cannot be ignored. The truth is closer now than it has ever been, but it also feels more complicated. Because proving that coffee can heal does not automatically prove his innocence. It raises questions, it challenges assumptions, but it does not provide the kind of evidence the system demands. As they prepare to return to the prison, Paul realizes that this moment has changed everything for him. He no longer doubts what coffee is capable of. The question now is whether that truth can be used in time to change what is about to happen. The drive back to the prison feels longer than the one that brought them to Paul's home. No one says much, but the silence is different now. It is not filled with uncertainty. It is filled with the weight of what they have just witnessed. There is no doubt left among them about what John Coffey can do. The question that remains is far more difficult. What does that truth change, and is it enough to stop what is already in motion? Coffey sits quietly during the ride, his large frame leaning slightly as if the effort of what he has done still lingers in his body. His breathing is steady, but there is a visible exhaustion in him that cannot be ignored. He does not ask for recognition, does not speak about what just happened. It is as if he sees it as something natural, even though everyone else in that car understands how far from normal it truly is. Paul keeps his eyes forward, but his thoughts are far from the road. The image of his wife, now free from the pain that had been consuming her, repeats in his mind. That moment alone is enough to confirm that Coffey's ability is real. But confirmation does not equal solution. It creates a deeper conflict, one that feels almost impossible to resolve within the system he serves. When they arrive back at Cold Mountain, the structure of the prison returns immediately. The gates, the walls, the routines all stand unchanged, as if nothing outside of them could possibly matter. Coffey is escorted back to his cell without incident, his movements calm and cooperative. The guards fall back into their roles, but the sense of normalcy feels thinner now, stretched over something much larger beneath the surface. Paul does not return to routine as easily. He lingers for a moment outside Coffey's cell, watching him settle back into the small space that now feels even more unjust than before. Coffey looks up, meeting Paul's gaze with that same quiet understanding. There is no expectation in his eyes, no demand for anything to change. That acceptance unsettles Paul more than resistance ever could. Later that night, Paul gathers Brutal and the others involved. The conversation is no longer about possibility. It is about what comes next. They go over everything again, not because they doubt it, but because they need to understand how to act on it. The reality is clear. Coffey has done something extraordinary. He has proven that he is not what they believed him to be. But the system they operate in does not change based on personal experience. Brutal voices what they are all thinking. Even if they believe Coffey is innocent, they do not have the kind of evidence that can overturn a conviction. What they have is something real, but it exists outside the rules that define justice in their world. That creates a barrier that feels almost impossible to break through. Paul listens, his expression focused, but there is a shift in him that is becoming more visible. He is no longer just weighing options. He is feeling the pressure of time in a way that demands action. Coffey's execution is approaching, and every moment that passes reduces the chance of doing anything meaningful to stop it. The conversation turns toward Wild Bill. If there is any chance of uncovering the truth, it lies there. The connection between him and Coffey is too strong to ignore, and the fragments they witnessed earlier suggest that he knows more than he has revealed. The challenge is finding a way to bring that truth out in a form that can be used. They consider different approaches, each one carrying its own risks. Interrogation within the system is limited. Wild Bill is unpredictable, and pushing him too far could lead to more chaos rather than clarity. At the same time, doing nothing is no longer an option. The balance between caution and urgency becomes the central issue. As they discuss, Coffee remains in his cell, but his presence is felt in the conversation even without him being there. Everything comes back to him, to what he has shown them, to what they now believe. The decision they are facing is not just about procedure. It is about whether they are willing to act on that belief, even if it means stepping outside the boundaries they have followed for years. The next day, the tension on the block continues to build. Wild Bill behaves as he always does, shifting between chaos and moments of unsettling calm. But now, every word he speaks is listened to more carefully. Every reaction is observed with a different level of attention. The guards are no longer just managing him. They are watching for something specific, something that could confirm what they suspect. Coffee, on the other hand, grows quieter. The effort of healing Melinda has clearly taken something from him, leaving him more withdrawn than before. He spends more time sitting, his large hands resting still, his eyes often distant. There is a sense that he is carrying more than just physical exhaustion, something deeper that weighs on him in a way that is not immediately visible. Paul notices this and feels a growing urgency. Time is not just passing, it is pressing in on them. The window to act is narrowing, and the cost of inaction is becoming clearer with each passing hour. That urgency leads to a decision. They cannot rely on the system to uncover the truth. They have to find it themselves. The plan begins to take shape slowly, built on what they know about Wild Bill and how he reacts. They need to create a situation where he reveals something, where the connection between him and the crime becomes undeniable. It is not a simple plan, and it is not without risk. Wild Bill is volatile, and pushing him could lead to unpredictable consequences. But the alternative is accepting an outcome they now believe to be wrong. That is not something Paul is willing to do anymore. The moment that follows comes sooner than expected. During another tense interaction on the block, Wild Bill begins to act out again, his behavior escalating quickly. The guards step in, controlling the situation, but this time, there is a different intention behind their actions. They are not just restoring order. They are creating an opportunity. Coffee reacts once more, his distress rising as Wild Bill's behavior intensifies. The connection between them becomes visible again, but this time, Paul steps closer, more focused, more deliberate. He watches both of them, looking for the moment where something breaks through. Wild Bill's words begin to shift, moving away from random provocation into something more pointed. He starts to say things that feel too specific to be coincidence, references that align with the crime in a way that cannot be ignored. The guards hold their positions, allowing the moment to develop, resisting the urge to shut it down too quickly. Coffee responds, his voice strained, his words reflecting the same fragments. The overlap between them grows stronger, the connection clearer. It is no longer just a feeling. It is something that can be seen, heard, experienced by everyone present. For a brief moment, it feels like the truth is about to surface completely. That everything they have been building toward is finally within reach. But just as quickly, the moment fractures. Wild Bill pulls back, his behavior snapping back into its usual chaos, the clarity dissolving into noise. The opportunity slips away, leaving behind frustration and a deeper sense of urgency. They were close, closer than before, but not close enough. The truth is still there, just out of reach, and time continues to move forward without waiting. Paul steps back, his mind racing. The path ahead is becoming clearer, but it is also becoming more dangerous. The choices they are making are no longer just about bending rules. They are about crossing lines that cannot easily be uncrossed. And as he looks toward Coffee, sitting quietly in his cell, carrying a burden that no one else can fully understand, Paul realizes that whatever they do next will define not just the outcome of the story, but the kind of man he chooses to be. The failure to pull a clear confession from Wild Bill leaves a heavy frustration hanging over E Block, but it does not weaken Paul's resolve. If anything, it sharpens it. The truth is no longer something he questions. It is something he believes. The problem now is not belief. It is proof, and time is running out to find it. The routine of the prison continues, but it feels disconnected from what is happening beneath the surface. The guards go through their duties, unlocking doors, making rounds, following procedure, yet their focus is divided. Every action feels like it is leading towards something larger, something that cannot be contained within the structure they have relied on for years. Paul carries this tension with a controlled intensity. He does not show panic or desperation, but there is a clear shift in how he moves, how he speaks, how he looks at Coffee. The man he once saw as just another inmate is now the center of a truth he cannot ignore. That truth demands action, even if the path forward is unclear. Coffee, however, seems to move in the opposite direction. He grows quieter with each passing day, more withdrawn, as if the weight of everything around him is pressing down in a way that cannot be relieved. His interactions become minimal, his energy lower, his presence more distant. It is not just physical exhaustion. It feels like something deeper, something tied to what he knows and what he has already accepted. One evening, Paul decides to speak with him directly, not as a guard, but as someone searching for answers. The block is calm, the usual noise reduced to a low hum. When Paul approaches the cell, Coffee looks up slowly, his expression calm but tired. There is no resistance in him, no hesitation. It is as if he has been expecting this moment. Paul does not begin with questions about the case. Instead, he speaks about what Coffee did for his wife. He acknowledges it directly, without hesitation, making it clear that he understands the significance of that act. Coffee listens, his eyes steady, his expression unchanged. When Paul finishes, there is a brief silence that feels heavier than any words. Then Coffee speaks, and what he says shifts the direction of everything. He does not deny the crime in a way that sounds defensive. He does not argue his innocence in the way someone trying to escape would. Instead, he explains something that feels both simple and overwhelming at the same time. He says that he tried to help, that when he found the girls, they were already gone, and he tried to bring them back, to fix what had been done. The words land with a quiet weight, not dramatic, not forced, but deeply unsettling. They align with everything Paul has begun to believe, yet hearing them spoken directly changes something. It removes the last layer of uncertainty and replaces it with a truth that feels impossible to ignore. Coffee continues, describing what it feels like to carry pain that does not belong to him. He speaks about how the world feels to him, how he experiences things in a way that others do not. There is no attempt to make it sound extraordinary. He speaks about it as if it is simply part of who he is, something he has always known. Then he says something that stops Paul completely. He says that he is tired, not in the way someone describes physical exhaustion, but in a deeper sense. Tired of feeling the pain of others, tired of carrying things that are too heavy, tired of living in a world where so much hurt exists. The words are quiet, but they carry a weight that fills the space between them. Paul feels the impact of this more than anything else. Up until this point, his focus has been on saving Coffee, on finding a way to change the outcome. But this introduces something different. It suggests that Coffee may not want to be saved in the way Paul imagines. That his understanding of what is right might not align with Coffee's own perspective. This realization creates a conflict that is more personal than anything he has faced so far. It is no longer just about justice or procedure. It is about understanding what Coffee wants, and whether saving him is truly the right thing to do. Coffee then reveals the truth about Wild Bill, not through accusation, but through experience. He explains that he saw what happened, that he felt it when he touched him, that the pain and violence connected to the crime did not belong to him. The way he describes it is not like recalling a memory. It is like reliving it, as if the experience exists within him in a way that cannot be separated. Paul listens, his mind processing every word. This is the confirmation he has been searching for, the piece that connects everything together. But even as it brings clarity, it also brings a deeper frustration. Because what Coffee is describing cannot be easily translated into something the system will accept. Brutal joins the conversation shortly after, and Paul shares what Coffee has said. The reaction is immediate, a mix of understanding and frustration. They now know the truth, at least as much as they can within the limits of what they have experienced. But knowing is not the same as proving. They consider their options again, but the list has not changed. There is no clear path to overturning Coffey's sentence. The system is already moving forward, and the kind of evidence they have does not fit into its structure. The realization settles in heavily. They are running out of time, and the truth they hold may not be enough to change what is coming. Meanwhile, the block continues to move toward its inevitable conclusion. The preparations for Coffey's execution begin to take shape, the same procedures, the same routines, but with a completely different emotional weight behind them. The guards carry out their duties, but the sense of purpose that once guided them is no longer as stable. Coffey remains calm through all of this. He does not resist, does not argue, does not show fear in the way others have before him. His acceptance is steady, almost peaceful, and that creates a contrast that is difficult to process. It forces those around him to confront the reality of what is about to happen in a way that feels deeply uncomfortable. Paul struggles with this more than anyone. The idea of allowing this to happen, knowing what he now knows, feels like a betrayal of everything he believes in. But at the same time, Coffey's words echo in his mind. The idea that he is tired, that he may not want to continue carrying the weight he has been given. This conflict does not resolve itself easily. It sits with Paul, growing heavier as the execution approaches. Every step he takes, every decision he makes, is influenced by it. There is no clear answer, no simple resolution. Wild Bill remains on the block, his presence still chaotic, still disruptive. But now, he is seen differently. Not just as a problem to be managed, but as the source of a truth that came too late. His behavior continues, but it no longer holds the same power. The focus has shifted entirely to Coffey and what is about to happen. As the day draws closer, the atmosphere on E Block becomes almost still. The usual sounds fade into the background, replaced by a quiet that feels heavier than noise. The Green Mile stretches out as it always has, but now it feels different, as if it carries more than just the steps of those who walk it. Paul stands at the center of it, caught between what he knows and what he is expected to do. The path ahead is clear in terms of procedure, but unclear in terms of meaning. And as he looks toward Coffey, sitting calmly in his cell, he realizes that the final decision may not be about changing the outcome, but about understanding it. The day of John Coffey's execution arrives with a quiet finality that feels heavier than anything that came before it. There is no chaos, no sudden shift in pace. Everything moves forward exactly as it is supposed to, and that is what makes it harder to accept. The system is working as designed, but for the first time, that design feels deeply flawed to those carrying it out. Paul wakes with a weight that does not lift. It sits with him as he prepares, as he steps into the familiar routine that now feels foreign. Every action feels deliberate, every movement tied to a moment he knows cannot be undone. There is no room for delay, no opportunity to pause what has already been set in motion. On E Block, the atmosphere is almost still. The guards move through their duties with a quiet focus, speaking only when necessary. The usual attempts at light conversation are gone. There is nothing to distract from what is coming. Each man carries his own thoughts, his own way of coping, but the shared understanding connects them in a way that words cannot. Coffey remains in his cell, calm and composed. There is no sign of resistance, no indication that he wishes to change what is about to happen. His presence is steady, grounded in a way that contrasts sharply with the emotional tension around him. When Paul approaches, Coffey looks up with a softness in his eyes that feels almost comforting, as if he is the one offering reassurance. Paul pauses outside the cell longer than usual. This is not a routine check. This is the last time he will stand here in this way. He searches for something to say, something that could make sense of the moment, but the words do not come easily. There is too much behind them, too much that cannot be expressed in simple language. Coffey breaks the silence gently. He speaks without hesitation, as if he has already accepted everything that needs to be accepted. He tells Paul that he is not afraid, not of what is coming. What troubles him is something else entirely. He talks about the world, about the pain he feels in it, the cruelty, the constant weight of suffering that he cannot escape. He describes it in a way that feels deeply personal, yet universal at the same time. It is not just his burden. It is something he has carried for others, something that has defined his existence. The way he speaks about it makes it clear that his decision to accept his fate is not driven by fear, but by exhaustion. He is ready to be free from it. Paul listens, his chest tight with the weight of those words. This is the conflict he has been struggling with, now spoken clearly in front of him. Saving Coffee would mean keeping him in a world that has caused him nothing but pain. Letting him go means allowing an injustice to happen, even if it aligns with Coffee's own wishes. There is no easy resolution, and Paul knows it. He nods slowly, acknowledging what Coffee is saying, even if it does not ease what he feels. The moment passes quietly, leaving behind a sense of finality that cannot be avoided. The preparations begin soon after. The procedures are followed with precision, each step carried out exactly as it has been before. But this time, every action feels heavier. The guards are not just performing a duty. They are participating in something they no longer fully believe in. Coffee is escorted from his cell, his movements calm, his posture steady. There is no resistance, no hesitation. He walks alongside the guards with a quiet dignity that makes the moment even more difficult to process. The Green Mile stretches out in front of him, the same path others have walked, but this time it feels different. Each step is deliberate, not rushed, not slowed. The guards walk with him, their presence steady, but their expressions reveal the emotional weight they carry. Brutal stays close, his usual strength still present, but there is a softness in his eyes that was not there before. This is not just another execution. This is something that will stay with them long after it is over. As they reach the execution room, the atmosphere tightens. The space is prepared, everything in place, waiting. The chair stands as it always has, unchanged, indifferent to the significance of who sits in it. The contrast between the object and the moment is striking. One is mechanical, the other deeply human. Coffee is seated, the straps secured with care. The guards move through the process with a level of attention that reflects more than just professionalism. There is a respect in their actions, a recognition of who he is beyond the label placed on him. Every movement is careful, deliberate, as if they are trying to preserve something that cannot be saved. Paul steps forward, his role clear, his voice steady despite everything he feels. He begins the formal process, asking the required questions, following the structure that defines this moment. When he asks Coffee if he has any last words, the room seems to hold its breath. Coffee speaks softly, his voice carrying a calm that contrasts with the weight of the moment. He does not speak of anger or regret. Instead, he talks about his fear of the dark, asking that the hood not be placed over his head. It is a simple request, but it reveals something deeply human, something that cuts through everything else. Paul hesitates for only a moment before agreeing. It is a small act, but it feels significant. It is a way of honoring Coffee's humanity in a system that often strips it away. The other guards understand without needing it to be explained. Coffee continues, speaking about love, about the importance of kindness, about the things that matter beyond the structures that define their world. His words are not long, but they carry a weight that fills the room. They are not spoken to change anything. They are spoken because they need to be said. When he finishes, there is a brief silence that feels almost sacred. It is a moment where everything pauses, where the reality of what is about to happen becomes fully clear. Paul looks at Coffee, meeting his gaze one last time. There is no fear there, only acceptance. The final steps are carried out. The switch is prepared, the process set in motion. Paul takes a breath, steadying himself for what comes next. This is the moment he has been leading toward, the moment that defines his role, his responsibility, his conflict. When the execution is carried out, it happens quickly, without the complications that marked Dell's end. The process works as it is supposed to, but that does not make it easier to witness. The room remains quiet, the guards standing in place, each one processing the moment in their own way. When it is over, there is no immediate movement. The stillness lingers, heavy and complete. The absence of Coffee's presence is felt immediately, leaving behind a space that feels emptier than before. The Green Mile has claimed another life, but this time, it feels like something more was lost. Paul steps back, his role completed, but the weight of what just happened does not lift. It settles deeper, becoming something that will stay with him long after this moment. The questions, the conflict, the understanding, all remain unresolved in a way that cannot be fixed. As the guards begin to move again, returning to their duties, the world outside the execution room continues as it always does. The system moves forward, unchanged, unaffected by the truth that existed within these walls. But for Paul, and for those who stood beside him, nothing is the same. The execution of John Coffey does not end when the room clears. It stays. It follows Paul long after the procedures are completed, long after the guards return to their routines, long after the silence of that moment fades into the background of daily life. There is a finality to what happened, but there is no closure. Instead, there is a lingering presence, something that settles into Paul's memory and refuses to leave. The immediate hours after feel distant, almost unreal. The guards move through their duties with a quiet efficiency, but their energy is different. There are fewer words, fewer attempts to distract themselves from what they just witnessed. Each man carries it in his own way, but the shared understanding remains. This was not just another execution. This was something that changed how they see everything. Brutal remains steady on the surface, continuing his role with the same strength he has always shown. But there is a heaviness in him now, something that shows in the way he pauses more often, in the way his usual confidence feels slightly restrained. He does not speak much about what happened, but he does not need to. The impact is clear in his presence alone. Percy, for the first time, seems quieter than usual. The arrogance that once defined him has softened, replaced by something closer to unease. He does not engage with the others the way he used to. He keeps his distance, avoiding direct interaction. It is not clear whether this change comes from guilt or from something else, but the shift is noticeable. Wild Bill remains on the block, his behavior unchanged on the surface. He continues to provoke, to disrupt, to act without concern for consequences. But now, he is seen differently. The guards no longer respond to him with the same level of engagement. There is a distance in how they with him, as if they are no longer interested in what he presents on the outside. They have seen enough to understand that what matters lies beneath that behavior. Paul moves through all of this with a quiet intensity. He does his job, follows the routine, maintains the structure that has defined his role for years. But internally, everything has shifted. The certainty he once relied on is gone, replaced by a deeper awareness of the flaws within the system he serves. He finds himself thinking about Coffey often, not just about the final moments, but about everything that led up to them. The conversations, the small gestures, the quiet understanding that grew over time. Each memory carries a weight that feels heavier now, because it cannot be changed or revisited. Time moves forward as it always does. The block continues to function, new inmates arrive, others leave, the routine repeating itself in a way that feels almost mechanical. But for Paul, the repetition no longer brings comfort. It feels like a reminder, a constant loop that highlights what cannot be undone. Years pass, and the story shifts back to the present, to the older version of Paul we saw at the beginning. The nursing home feels quiet, almost detached from the world he once knew. But the memories remain vivid, as if they exist outside of time. When he speaks about them, it is not with nostalgia. It is with a clarity that suggests they have never faded. The connection between past and present becomes clearer as Paul reflects on what happened after Coffey's execution. He reveals that something changed in him, not just emotionally, but physically as well. Time has not affected him in the same way it has affected others. He has lived far longer than expected, watching people come and go, carrying the memory of what happened on the Green Mile through decades. This detail adds another layer to the story, one that shifts the perspective even further. Coffey's gift did not end with the people he healed directly. It extended beyond that, leaving a lasting impact on Paul that he continues to carry. It is not presented as a reward. It feels more like a responsibility, a continuation of something that cannot be easily explained. Paul speaks about this with a sense of reflection that feels both calm and heavy. He does not present it as something extraordinary. He presents it as something he has had to live with, something that has shaped his understanding of life, of justice, of the choices people make. He recalls the moment with Melinda, the way her life changed, the way that single act confirmed everything he believed about coffee. He connects it to the larger picture, to the idea that sometimes truth exists outside the structures we rely on to define it. That sometimes, the system fails not because it lacks rules, but because it cannot account for everything. The emotional weight of this reflection builds gradually. It is not about regret alone. It is about understanding, about coming to terms with a reality that does not offer simple answers. Paul does not claim to have resolved this conflict. He carries it even now as part of who he is. There is a moment where he speaks about the Green Mile itself, not just as a physical place, but as a symbol. It represents a path, a journey that leads to an end, but also a space where people reveal who they truly are. For some, it is a place of fear. For others, it is a place of acceptance. For Paul, it became a place of realization, where he saw both the strength and the failure of the system he believed in. As the story moves toward its final reflection, Paul's perspective becomes the anchor. He is no longer just telling a story. He is sharing an experience that has defined his life. The way he speaks about coffee carries a respect that goes beyond admiration. It feels like a recognition of something rare, something that changed him in a way nothing else could. The final moments of this reflection are quiet, measured, and deeply personal. Paul does not try to resolve the questions the story raises. He does not offer a clear answer to what justice should look like or how the system should change. Instead, he leaves those questions open, allowing them to remain as part of the story itself. From a review perspective, this is where The Green Mile stands apart. It does not rely on twists or spectacle to leave an impact. It builds its weight through character, through emotion, through the slow unfolding of a story that feels grounded even when it touches on something beyond the ordinary. The pacing, which might feel slow at first, becomes one of its greatest strengths. It allows each moment to breathe, to settle, to leave a mark. The performances play a major role in this. Tom Hanks carries the story with a steady presence that makes Paul feel real at every stage of his life. Michael Clarke Duncan delivers something that goes beyond acting. His portrayal of coffee brings a level of sincerity and depth that anchors the entire film. The supporting cast adds layers to the story, each character contributing to the overall experience without feeling unnecessary. The direction keeps everything grounded, even as the story introduces elements that could easily feel out of place. The balance between realism and something more abstract is handled with care, allowing the film to explore deeper themes without losing its connection to the audience. By the time the story reaches its end, it has done more than tell a narrative. It has created an experience that stays with you, not because of what happens, but because of how it makes you think about what happens. If you look at it purely as a film, it stands strong in every aspect. The storytelling, the performances, the pacing, all come together in a way that feels complete. But what makes it stand out is the emotional impact, the way it lingers, the way it challenges you to think beyond the surface. On a scale of 10, this film earns a solid 9.5. Not because it is perfect in every technical sense, but because of the way it connects, the way it stays with you long after it ends. If you have not watched it yet, take the time to experience it fully. And if you have, then you already understand why this story continues to resonate. Part 15. There is something important to understand about why this story stays with people long after it ends. It is not just the events, and it is not just the characters. It is the way everything comes together to challenge what you believe about fairness, about justice, and about the role people play inside systems that feel larger than them. What makes The Green Mile stand out is how carefully it builds that challenge. It does not force you into one conclusion. It presents situations, allows you to sit with them, and then leaves you to decide what they mean. That approach is rare, especially in stories that deal with life and death. It respects your ability to think, rather than telling you what to feel. Paul's journey is at the center of that experience. At the start, he is a man who believes in structure, in the idea that following the rules leads to the right outcome. Over time, that belief is tested, not through one dramatic moment, but through a series of smaller realizations. Each one pushes him further away from certainty and closer to something more complex. By the end, he is not someone who has all the answers. He is someone who understands that answers are not always available, and that sometimes, the most important thing is recognizing when something is wrong, even if you cannot fix it. That shift in perspective is what gives the story its lasting impact. Coffey's role in this is just as important, but for a different reason. He represents something that does not fit into the system at all. His presence challenges not just the characters, but the entire structure of the story. He forces everyone around him to question what they believe, not through argument, but through his actions. What makes his character powerful is the lack of resistance. He does not fight the system in the way you might expect. He does not try to prove his innocence in a traditional sense. Instead, he exists within it, showing its limitations simply by being who he is. That approach makes his story more impactful, because it does not rely on conflict in the usual way. The relationship between Paul and Coffey becomes the emotional core of the film. It is not built on dramatic exchanges or sudden changes. It grows slowly, through small moments of understanding. That gradual development makes their final interactions feel real, grounded in something that has been earned over time. The supporting characters add depth to this dynamic. Brutal represents strength balanced with empathy, showing that authority does not have to come at the expense of humanity. His presence reinforces the idea that people within the system can still choose how they act, even if they cannot control the outcome. Percy, on the other hand, represents the danger of power without accountability. His actions highlight how easily the system can be misused when the wrong person is given control. He is not just a contrast to the others. He is a reminder that the system itself is not inherently just. It depends on the people within it. Wild Bill serves a different purpose. He brings chaos into the story, but also reveals the truth that the system failed to see. His presence is uncomfortable, but necessary. Without him, the full picture would never come into focus. He represents the part of the story that exposes the flaw at the center of everything. From a storytelling perspective, the pacing plays a crucial role. The film takes its time, allowing each moment to develop fully before moving on. This might feel slow to some, but it is essential to the impact of the story. It creates space for emotion, for reflection, for the kind of depth that cannot be achieved through quick transitions. The use of the supernatural element is handled with care. It is never used as a shortcut or a way to solve problems easily. Instead, it is integrated into the story in a way that feels natural within its context. It adds another layer to the narrative without taking away from the realism that grounds it. The cinematography supports this approach by keeping the focus on the characters and their environment. The visuals do not try to overwhelm. They stay consistent, allowing the story to take center stage. The use of light and shadow, especially within the prison setting, reinforces the emotional tone without drawing attention to itself. The music also plays a subtle but important role. It enhances the emotional moments without overpowering them. It supports the story rather than leading it, allowing the performances to remain the primary focus. One of the most effective aspects of the film is how it handles its emotional peaks. It does not rely on sudden, dramatic shifts. Instead, it builds toward them gradually, allowing the impact to feel earned. This makes the key moments more powerful, because they are the result of everything that came before. Another strength is the consistency in tone. From start to finish, the film maintains a balance between realism and something more abstract. It does not shift abruptly or lose its focus. This consistency helps maintain immersion, keeping you connected to the story throughout its entire length. Looking at it from a YouTube perspective, this is the kind of film that benefits from a deeper breakdown. It is not something that can be fully appreciated through quick summaries or surface-level commentary. It requires attention, reflection, and a willingness to engage with the themes it presents. That is why approaching it as a review and analysis, rather than a simple retelling, adds value. It allows you to explore the meaning behind the events, to understand why certain moments matter, and to connect with the story on a deeper level. If you are creating content around films like this, the key is to focus on what makes them unique. Instead of just explaining what happens, look at why it matters. Look at how it affects the characters, how it challenges the audience, how it stays relevant even years after its release. The Green Mile is a strong example of how storytelling can go beyond entertainment. It shows that films can ask questions, create emotional connections, and leave a lasting impression without relying on spectacle. It proves that simplicity, when handled with care, can be more powerful than complexity. For anyone watching or reviewing this film, the takeaway is not just about what happened to John Coffey. It is about what his story represents. It is about the choices people make, the systems they trust, and the moments where those systems fail. And for Paul, the journey does not end with the execution. It continues in the years that follow, in the way he carries that experience, in the way it shapes his understanding of the world. That continuation is what gives the story its final layer, the one that stays with you even after everything else has been said.